The Chilling House. She was a long-time listener, having followed the show even before moving to Maple Creek several years prior, usually tuning in via the dedicated app. Tonight, however, she wasn't just a listener. She had a story to share, an experience she termed the Chilling House. A tale rooted not in Maple Creek, but in Riverside Town, a coastal province closer to the capital, an event that transpired years ago but remained vivid and unsettling. Before diving into the main ordeal at the house itself, May felt compelled to set the stage with an unnerving incident that occurred just the day before her fateful trip to Riverside Town. It served as a disquieting prelude, leaving her feeling apprehensive even before encountering the Chilling House. She had been driving her daughter's sedan near Maple Creek, returning from a pleasant family occasion, perhaps a wedding or celebration, accompanied by her own mother, her daughter, and her husband, Uncle Joe. Uncle Joe, a military man, tended to be skeptical about supernatural matters. May was driving along the Outer Loop Road, an area that back then was less developed, featuring long stretches of desolate, lonely road, particularly known for a section where violent incidents had occurred. They were chatting and laughing, enjoying the aftermath of the celebration, everyone dressed nicely and smelling faintly of perfume. Suddenly, as they passed through that notorious stretch of road, an overwhelming stench filled the car. It wasn't just unpleasant, it was specific and deeply offensive. The smell of stale, dried sweat, like the unwashed clothes of construction workers after a long day, mixed with the sour, musty odor of laundry left damp during the rainy season. It was potent, cutting through their perfumes and instantly silencing the conversation. Everyone fell quiet, even Uncle Joe. The smell lingered heavily for about 2 minutes before vanishing as abruptly as it had appeared. Shaken, but continuing onward, another strange phenomenon began. Every time May turned the car or navigated a curve, a loud, heavy thump resonated from the back, like a large, full water container, the kind used for drinking water dispensers, rolling around and slamming against the car's interior. Thump, bang, May asked Uncle Joe if he had put a water container in the back. He denied it. Her mother and daughter remained silent in the back seat. The unnerving sounds persisted. When they reached a red light and stopped, May noticed a pickup truck had pulled up behind them but kept a noticeable distance, not directly tailgating. Then, a sharp tap-tap-tap sounded on her driver's side window. Instinctively, thinking perhaps a door was ajar or something was visibly wrong with the car, May reached to lower the window. But Uncle Joe, sitting beside her, sharply grabbed her hand, stopping her. "Don't open it," he commanded firmly, his voice tight. His reaction confirmed he had heard the knocking too, and perhaps sensed something amiss. As soon as the light turned green, he urged her to drive off immediately. The thumping sound from the back continued, as if the unseen container was being violently thrown around, until they finally turned off that particular stretch of road. Once they were clear, Uncle Joe stated grimly, "We're out of their territory now." He seemed to imply they had crossed some unseen boundary, a zone where whatever was with them could no longer follow. May, though terrified, desperately wanted to stop and check the trunk, but Uncle Joe forbade it until they reached home. Upon arrival, after saying a prayer to their home's guardian spirit for protection, May finally opened the trunk. It was completely empty. There was no water container, nothing heavy, nothing that could have possibly made those sounds. She had been haunted, tangibly, though she hadn't seen the source. This experience left her deeply unsettled, wondering what she had done to attract such an encounter, especially as she was already someone deeply afraid of ghosts, prone to interpreting any strange occurrence as paranormal. The very next day, still carrying the unease from the previous night's spectral encounter, May traveled with Uncle Joe to Riverside Town. Uncle Joe had a short, intensive training course or seminar to attend related to his military career progression, during which he wouldn't be easily contactable. Since they needed accommodation, and Uncle Joe hadn't visited this particular relative in years, they arranged to stay at the house belonging to the family of Grandma Willow. May had never been to this house before. The information they had was that Grandma Willow's daughter lived abroad, leaving the elderly grandmother, who suffered from mild Alzheimer's and partial paralysis limiting her mobility, in the care of an elderly live-in helper, Auntie Sarah. They arrived at the house in the late afternoon, around 4 p.m. Uncle Joe, perhaps sensing the atmosphere or simply being cautious due to May's known fear of the supernatural, asked her repeatedly if she was sure she would be okay staying there alone while he was away at his seminar location. May, not having explored the house yet and wanting to appear brave, assured him she would be fine. "Go on, don't worry about me. Auntie Sarah is here," she insisted. After brief introductions and pleasantries with Grandma Willow, Uncle Joe gathered his things and left. Shortly after, the house phone rang. It was Uncle Joe. He had forgotten his mobile phone. He explained he wouldn't be able to contact her easily now and told her not to worry, confirming he'd be staying with his colleagues at the seminar venue. With Uncle Joe gone and the reality of her stay setting in, May began to properly survey her surroundings. The house immediately presented a strange and cluttered environment. Entering the front door, the left side opened into a long room enclosed entirely in glass, seemingly a later addition. To the right was a carport area, but instead of cars, it was crammed with shelves. These shelves were overflowing with an astonishing variety of items. Piles of clothes ranging from infant wear to elderly garments, stacks of shoes, men's, women's, children's, easily dozens of pairs, and most disturbingly, about 6 or 7 wigs perched on stands, different styles for men and women. May later learned the source of this hoard. Grandma Willow's son, who struggled with alcoholism and had undergone treatment, had apparently developed a habit during his sober periods. With little else to do, he would cycle around the neighborhood, collecting anything and everything discarded by others. Clothes, shoes, wigs, even brand new towels, furniture like rocking chairs and swings, which he apparently repaired himself, and decorative items. He brought it all home, and nothing ever seemed to leave. The carport collection felt less like storage and more like a bizarre, unintentional museum of discarded lives. Just outside, near a small, murky pond he had built, stood a fishing gnome statue, about the size of a toddler, eerily missing one arm. Venturing further into the main part of the house, where Grandma Willow resided, May discovered a peculiar layout. The structure seemed built in a U or O shape around Grandma Willow's downstairs bedroom. Her room sat in the center, surrounded by a continuous walkway or corridor space, meaning one could circle her room entirely from the outside, passing various doors that connected different sections. May couldn't fathom the reason for such a design. Upstairs housed 2 rooms, a guest bedroom and a prayer room. The prayer room was another source of unease. It lacked a door and was filled, almost crammed, with religious statues and icons from seemingly every possible faith and origin. Hindu deities like Kali, Buddhist figures like Kuan Yin, Tai Guman Thong and Nang Quack talismans, large and small, likely more items collected from refuse piles. As evening began to descend, May carried her bag, trying desperately to find a suitable place to sleep. Each option proved more unnerving than the last. The prayer room upstairs was out. Sleeping exposed in a room filled with staring idols of various origins felt impossible. She considered the long glass room downstairs, but discovered it had previously been rented out as a dance studio. The former tenant, a dance teacher whose husband had reportedly passed away, had left abruptly, abandoning everything, including 2 life-sized, fully dressed dancer mannequins. The room was lined with large mirrors, typical of a dance studio. Sitting anywhere meant seeing multiple reflections of herself alongside 8 reflections of the unnerving mannequins. Sleep there was unimaginable. She then tried one of the sleeping spots set up in the strange O-shaped corridor surrounding Grandma Willow's room. The house seemed to have beds or mattresses tucked into various corners. But the spot she chose faced a chilling display. 4 black and white framed funeral portraits propped up against the pillows on the bed, one of an old relative, one of Grandma Willow's late husband, one of her deceased son, the collector, and one unidentified person. The dates indicated they had passed away some time ago. Sleeping under the gaze of the dead was unthinkable. Another potential corner offered a window view. but looking out revealed the disturbing one-armed fishing gnome statue standing prominently in the dim light filtering from a neighboring property. Feeling increasingly trapped and desperate as darkness fully enveloped the strange house, May made her final decision. Resigning herself, she decided the safest feeling option, despite everything, was to sleep on the floor in Grandma Willow's room. At least she wouldn't be entirely alone. The room itself was cluttered, filled with broken lamps and dusty artificial flowers, but the presence of the frail, mostly sleeping elderly woman offered a sliver of comfort. As May settled down, having bathed and changed, she checked the time. It was nearing midnight. Just then, Auntie Sarah, the caretaker, announced she was popping out quickly to visit her nephew, who ran a noodle stall nearby, asking May to keep an eye on Grandma Willow. Despite May's silent pleas for her not to leave, Auntie Sarah departed, leaving May utterly alone with the sleeping, Alzheimer's-afflicted grandmother in the heart of the chilling, junk-filled house, as the clock ticked towards the witching hour. The situation was set. Isolated, surrounded by unsettling objects and memories, in a house that already felt profoundly wrong, with her only potential human contact having just walked out the door. The click of the front gate, shutting behind Auntie Sarah, echoed unnervingly in the sudden, profound silence of the house. May was truly alone now, save for the frail, slumbering form of Grandma Willow in the center of the room. Lying on the thin mattress on the floor, May wrapped herself tightly in a blanket. The cluttered surroundings of Grandma Willow's room, filled with broken things and dusty artificial flowers, offering zero comfort. She faced the wall, her back to the elderly woman's bed, trying desperately to will herself to sleep, despite the lingering unease from the day's earlier phantom encounter on the road and the inherently creepy atmosphere of this house, brimming with discarded belongings. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Just as May felt a sliver of drowsiness approach, sounds began from Grandma Willow's bed behind her. A rustling of blankets, soft murmurs, slight shifts in position. Initially, May tried to rationalize it. It's just Grandma Willow, she told herself. She has Alzheimer's, maybe she talks or moves in her sleep. It's normal. She kept her eyes squeezed shut, focusing on her breathing, reciting prayers silently in her head. But the sounds persisted, growing slightly louder, more distinct. It sounded less like the unconscious movements of sleep and more like someone awake, deliberately shifting. Then came the sound that made her blood run cold. A clear, unambiguous creak of the old bed springs, followed by the soft thud of feet landing on the wooden floor inside the room. It wasn't the sound of someone rolling over, it was the sound of someone getting up. May froze, every muscle tensed. Her mind raced. Grandma Willow was partially paralyzed, needing assistance to even sit up, let alone get out of bed. Auntie Sarah had explicitly mentioned this. It couldn't be her. Yet the sound was undeniable. Someone or something was now standing up in the room with her. Panic seized May. She pulled the blanket completely over her head, curling into a tight ball, convinced that if she couldn't see whatever was there, it couldn't see her. She squeezed her eyes, shut so hard they hurt, tears starting to leak from the corners. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She prayed frantically, reciting every protective mantra and Buddhist chant she knew, her lips moving silently under the blanket. Then, the footsteps began. Slow, deliberate, dragging footsteps. Shuff, drag, shuff, drag. They weren't coming from inside the room anymore. They were outside, moving along the strange, wraparound corridor that encircled Grandma Willow's central bedroom. May listened, paralyzed with terror, as the footsteps slowly, methodically circled the room. Once, twice. The sound was heavy, labored, like someone dragging heavy weights on their feet, or perhaps someone elderly and frail, struggling to walk. On the third circuit, the dragging footsteps stopped. They stopped directly outside the solid wall section of the room, where May lay huddled on the floor. There was no door there, no window, just the wall separating the interior bedroom from the exterior corridor. Silence descended again, thick and suffocating, broken only by the frantic pounding of May's own heart. She held her breath, straining to hear, praying for the sounds to resume and move away, or better yet, cease entirely. Instead, a new sound started. A soft, persistent scratching or tapping directly on the wall, right where the footsteps had stopped, just inches from where May lay terrified. Tap, scratch, tap, tap, scratch. It sounded like fingernails lightly scraping against the plaster, or perhaps someone gently knocking, trying to get her attention from the other side of the solid barrier. The sheer impossibility of it, someone standing in the corridor, tapping on a solid wall exactly where she was, amplified her terror tenfold. This wasn't just a strange noise. It felt targeted, deliberate, and utterly inexplicable by natural means. May burrowed deeper under the blanket, trembling uncontrollably, her prayers becoming desperate, choked whispers. She stayed like that, rigid with fear, for what felt like hours, the scratching sound continuing intermittently. Suddenly, the familiar sound of the front gate opening and closing, followed by Auntie Sarah's footsteps entering the house, shattered the tense silence. Relief washed over May in a dizzying wave. She heard Auntie Sarah moving around, checking on Grandma Willow, who seemingly hadn't stirred through the entire ordeal. Auntie Sarah then came over to where May was, asking softly if everything was all right. May threw off the blanket, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. She wanted to blurt out everything, the sounds, the footsteps, the scratching on the wall, but the words wouldn't come. How could she explain it? How could she make Auntie Sarah believe something so bizarre? She stammered something incoherent about hearing noises, but couldn't articulate the terrifying specifics. Auntie Sarah, perhaps accustomed to the house's peculiarities or simply tired, just patted her shoulder reassuringly, checked that Grandma Willow was comfortable, and then retreated to her own sleeping area elsewhere in the sprawling house, leaving May alone once more, though marginally less terrified now that another living person was present. Sleep, however, was now impossible. May sat up, leaning against the wall, determined to stay awake until dawn. The scratching sound didn't return, but the oppressive atmosphere remained. She strained her ears, listening to every creak and groan of the old house, jumping at shadows. The hours crawled by. Then, just as the first hint of pre-dawn gray began to lighten the sky, perhaps around 4 or 5 a.m., an enormous crash ripped through the house from the direction of the front glass room, the former dance studio. It wasn't just a bang. It was a shattering, splintering explosion of sound, loud enough to wake the dead, or at least to jolt both May and Auntie Sarah wide awake. "What was that?" May gasped, scrambling to her feet. Auntie Sarah emerged quickly from her room, looking concerned but strangely unsurprised. Together, they cautiously made their way towards the glass room. Pushing the door open, they were met with a startling sight. One of the two life-sized, fully dressed dancer mannequins lay face down on the floor amidst a spray of shattered glass. It had seemingly toppled forward, smashing through a glass panel or perhaps a mirror. May stared, bewildered. The mannequin was heavy, solid, positioned stably away from the edge. There were no open windows, no breeze, nothing that could have possibly knocked it over with such force. May looked at Auntie Sarah, expecting shock or confusion. Instead, the caretaker sighed, a look of weary resignation on her face. "Oh dear, again?" she murmured, almost to herself. She walked over, examining the fallen figure. Turning back to May, she explained matter-of-factly, "It's this house. Ever since the sun started bringing all this stuff back, things happen. Especially with these." She gestured vaguely towards the mannequin and the cluttered surroundings. "They belong to the dance teacher, you know. Her husband died. She left in a hurry." There was no fear in Auntie Sarah's voice, only a tired acceptance that bordered on nonchalance. It was clear to May that this was not the first time something inexplicable and violent had occurred. The house wasn't just cluttered. It was active, haunted, possibly by the energies attached to the mountain of discarded objects, or perhaps by something else entirely. The complication was undeniable now. This wasn't just a creepy house. It was a dangerous one, and she had spent the night utterly vulnerable within its walls. Standing there in the pre-dawn gloom, staring at the heavy mannequin lying face down amidst shattered glass, May felt a chilling certainty solidify within her. Auntie Sarah's weary acceptance, her casual mention of the collector son, and the house's propensity for things happening, confirmed May's deepest fears. This wasn't just a series of unfortunate coincidences or figments of her stressed imagination. The dragging footsteps, the impossible scratching on the solid wall, and now this violent, inexplicable crash. The house was undeniably, actively haunted. Whatever presence resided here, tangled perhaps with the energies clinging to the mountains of discarded objects, was not benign. It could interact physically and forcefully with its environment. The relief May had felt upon Auntie Sarah's return earlier evaporated, replaced by a stark, terrifying realization of her vulnerability. She was trapped. Dawn was still some time away, and leaving the house in the pitch dark felt equally dangerous. Her husband, Uncle Joe, was miles away and unreachable, unaware of the ordeal she was enduring. Auntie Sarah, while present, seemed almost desensitized to the phenomena, offering no real protection or viable solution beyond weary resignation. May was essentially alone, sleep-deprived, and confronting an unseen, hostile force within the walls of this bizarre repository of unwanted things. The central question burned in her mind, sharp and terrifying. How could she possibly endure the remaining hours until sunrise in this place? Having personally experienced the targeted scratching and witnessed the violent displacement of the heavy mannequin, what might happen next? Would the activity escalate further now that it had seemingly revealed its power? Was staying put, even with Auntie Sarah somewhere nearby, the safest option, or did she need to find a way to flee immediately, regardless of the darkness outside? And underlying it all, how could she possibly guarantee her safety when faced with something so potent and inexplicable, trapped within the chilling confines of the house until the first light of day offered a chance of escape? Faced with the undeniable evidence of the mannequin violently thrown to the floor and Auntie Sarah's unnerving acceptance of such phenomena, the questions raging in May's mind coalesced into a single, overwhelming imperative: escape. The carefully constructed walls of rationalization had crumbled completely, leaving only raw, primal fear. There was no longer any debate about enduring the remaining darkness or weighing the risks of staying versus leaving. The house itself felt fundamentally hostile, and the potential for further, perhaps more dangerous, manifestations seemed terrifyingly real. The answer to how she would survive until sunrise was simple: she wouldn't wait. The need for self-preservation eclipsed any lingering concerns about the pre-dawn darkness outside or the awkwardness of abandoning her host relative's home so abruptly. Adrenaline surging, May didn't hesitate. She scrambled back towards Grandma Willow's room, ignoring the clutter and the still sleeping figure on the bed. Her hands trembled as she hastily gathered her few belongings, stuffing them haphazardly into her bag. Every shadow seemed menacing, every creak of the old house amplified her panic. Within minutes, bag in hand, she found Auntie Sarah, who was perhaps contemplating how to deal with the mess in the glass room. "I'm sorry, Auntie Sarah," May managed to say, her voice tight with fear. "I can't stay here any longer. I have to leave." Right now, there was no room for discussion, no politeness that could override the sheer terror propelling her forward. Auntie Sarah looked at her, perhaps with a hint of understanding, perhaps just with the same weary resignation she displayed earlier, and didn't try to stop her. May practically fled towards the front door, not daring to look back at the glass room or the hallway where the footsteps had dragged, or the wall where the scratching had occurred. Pushing through the front gate and out into the cool, damp air of the earliest morning, the sky still a deep gray, streetlights casting long shadows, May felt an immense wave of relief wash over her, though the terror lingered like a cold shroud. She had removed herself from the immediate danger. She didn't know exactly where she would go or how she would contact Uncle Joe without his phone, but none of that mattered as much as the simple fact that she was out of that chilling house. Putting distance between herself and the oppressive atmosphere, the collected junk, the inexplicable events, and the unseen presence was the only answer. She walked quickly down the street as the first true light of dawn began to break, never once looking back, resolute in her decision never to set foot in that house again. The immediate crisis was over. She had chosen survival and escape. Did this story give you goosebumps? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more scary stories like this one, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel.